This is Mr. A coming at you, or as the saying goes, hey, all you crazy cats and kittens. I'm coming to you today out of my office, like usual. You can see I've decorated the wall around me with all kinds of beautiful hearts. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to present to you the second video on circulation. If you remember last week, what you guys um, watched was a video on respiration and circulation. And the circulation, I said, was part one. Today we're going to be watching a video on part two. Now, some of this is going to be a review of stuff that we talked about last week. In fact, a lot of it will, because I added to this something a little bit different. Instead of just giving me a couple things that you learned, there are 10 questions in this video, 10 questions that you're going to have to answer and email to me, josh.almers@k12.nd.us. You're going to email me your responses, and this is all going to be listed on Schoology, to these 10 questions, and that's how you're going to get graded on this PowerPoint. So you want to make sure you got a piece of paper out and that you pause the video when you have an opportunity to pause it and answer your questions. But this is all circulatory system, as you can see by my sweet hearts in the background. Abigail made that little guy right there, and then I got my heart shirt on, so we're talking about the heart today. So let's get right into it here. Last week I gave you guys a little bit of a preview on this idea that this is my dad, who had a massive heart attack at the age of 45. I'm going to tell you a story about that near the end of our discussion today. But first of all, a little bit of a review. We talked about the circulatory system being the blood, the heart, and the blood vessels. Three main parts. Now, what I want you guys to make sure you know is there is, when we bring things into our body, it is ultimately these three things that are working together to deliver all materials throughout every muscle and cell and ultimately every area of our body. What we do is when we breathe in, we're using a muscle. That was a question that some of you got wrong. Number 6 in last week's question was letter D, because the diaphragm is a muscle that brings air into our lungs. The problem is that the oxygen that comes into our body is now just stuck in our lungs. How do we get it to every cell? Well, we need our blood to grab a hold of that. So how does the oxygen go from our lungs into the blood? It's through a process. The process is diffusion. Diffusion is when oxygen is in an area of high concentration in the lungs and goes to an area of low concentration into our blood, and then our blood distributes that to every single cell throughout our body. The same thing happens with our nutrients. When you guys say drink a glass of milk, which by the way, milk is such a great food source because it is packed with almost every nutrient, right? It has vitamins, it has minerals, it has carbohydrates, it has some fat, it has some protein in it, and it has water. As your stomach breaks that down, turns it into chyme, your small intestine has all these blood vessels that are pulling those nutrients out. It's taking a high concentration of, say, a carbohydrate and allowing diffusion to take place, so it's going from high to low, and then it's being brought to every area of our body. So I gave you the answer for question number 1 within that little spiel, and it's also right within here. How does material go into and out of our cells? What's that process called when things go from an area of high to low concentration, like oxygen and nutrients? Now, your drawings, you guys did a really good job with. A couple of things that I want to point out. If we were to dissect this heart, which unfortunately we're not going to be able to do, had we been in class, we were going to dissect the heart, you would see what we'd do is we'd cut this, I can't really do it great here, but we'd cut this straight through this way. And when we open that up, we'd see little holes here, 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 and here. Those are the chambers. And then my second question here is, what is this black line? Inside there, when we'd open this up, we'd see a thick muscle that would make sure that none of our blood mixes from the right and the left side. That's because on the right side, we've got all kinds of oxygen poor blood, and on the left side, we've got all kinds of oxygen rich blood. This thing here is what separates that. And I just wanted to point that out. Some of you did an okay job of your drawings of showing this. Some of you did a great job. But this here is that wall that separates the two sides. And then as far as the chambers go, I already answered that. You can see it on this slide, which I'm going to go through quickly to keep moving along here. Now, this slide is absolutely packed with a whole bunch of stuff. I want you guys to understand how blood circulates throughout our body. All right, so this picture I think does a great job, and I don't know if I'm able to get all these pictures or these questions on here, but ultimately what I want you to understand is that blood comes to the heart through veins. And these veins are constantly getting bigger and bigger and bigger until they reach what's called the inferior or superior vena cava. Now, when I asked you to give me the pathway of blood, some of you skipped out on some parts. You've got to know the full pathway of blood. So blood enters the heart through either the inferior or the superior vena cava, and it goes into the right atrium. All right, so my questions for number 4 are, what are the major blood vessels that are connected to each 4 of the chambers? So for right atrium, I'll give you that answer. The vena cava is the blood vessel that connects to the right atrium. Now, when blood enters into the right atrium, it goes through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Then it leaves through what's called the pulmonary artery. This blood here is deoxygenated. You can see it's colored blue, like what you should have done in your drawings. Once it goes to the lungs, it becomes oxygen rich. Then it comes back through the pulmonary vein. Now, one thing I'm going to point out here is that all of our veins here are carrying oxygen poor blood. That's why it's blue. But this vein here, the pulmonary vein, is actually the only vein in our body that's carrying oxygen-rich blood. And on the flip side of that, when we get to these arteries, you'll notice all the arteries are carrying oxygen-rich blood, except for the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery actually is carrying oxygen-poor blood. That explanation should help you with 5 and 6. Okay, going back. Starting over quickly, vena cava, right atrium, through the tricuspid valve, into the right ventricle, through the pulmonary artery, into the lungs. The lungs are going to put a bunch of oxygen in there through the process of diffusion. Then the pulmonary vein brings that blood back to the heart. All veins lead to the heart. This vein is going to bring it to the left atrium. The left atrium then goes into the left ventricle. And then from the left ventricle, we go out through this giant artery called the aorta. I'll give you that answer too. What's major vessels connected to the left ventricle? That would be the aorta. So we can see that aorta. Then we've got arteries. Arteries get a little bit smaller and smaller and smaller until they get turn into what are called capillaries. The capillaries then match up with the veins, and then the veins bring that back to the vena cava, and so the process continues to circulate through our body. So that's the circulation that I want you to know, not just the chambers of the heart. Some of you just went with this: right atrium, tricuspid valve, left atrium, bicuspid valve, left ventricle. Some of you just went with that. I want the full gamut. And the other thing, just to give you a hint, some people get confused with how can we tell tricuspid valve is before the bicuspid valve. I always like to use the saying, try it before you buy it. Tricuspid before the bicuspid. So a nice little trick there to help you along with that. Continuing along, and by the way, some of your drawings were excellent. This is another example of a drawing that obviously I didn't do. Pathway of blood is listed here. I'm not going to take any time to go through that anymore, but good practice with the pathway of blood if you want to deposit there. I mentioned coronary, pulmonary, and systemic circulation, which a lot of you used as what you learned from your from this PowerPoint, and you explained that well. So here you can see the different circulations. And then my question for number 7, you can pause it and answer that, talking about not the circulation that goes just within the heart, not the circulation that goes just within the lungs, but all other circulation. What's that called? And the answer's on the slide. Again, arteries all carry blood away from the heart. Every artery, most of them, it's oxygen rich, with the exception, of course, of the pulmonary artery. That brings oxygen poor. Veins all bring blood back to the heart. Most of them, it's oxygen poor. The one exception is, of course, the pulmonary vein, and capillaries connect the two of those. This is now going to be some of our new material that we have not gone over with. So your heart will pump blood throughout the entirety of the body. And since your heart is beating constantly, it's going on and on and on and on and on, we can monitor how fast the heart is beating and how hard the heart is beating to see, is our body healthy? If our heart is pumping at a good pulse and a good pressure, we know that you're in good shape and you're doing a good job of taking care of your heart. If we see a pulse that's really high when you're resting or really low when you're resting, or same thing with blood pressure, we can recognize that there are problems. All right, so what is a healthy pulse and a healthy blood pressure? Well, first of all, we talk about the fact that a normal pulse is between 60 and, whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. It's between 60 and 100 beats per minute. So that's going to be a good pulse, is between 60 and 100 beats per minute. You can try this right now if you want. You can find your pulse, right here as your jugular, or you can do it on your wrist, and you can count for 1 minute. Count how many times your heart beat. If it's between 60 and 100, you're doing great. The other number that we check is what's called your blood pressure. Now, for a blood pressure, there are two numbers. There's a top number, which is called your systolic number, and then there's your bottom, which is called your diastolic. We want our first number to be between 100 and 140. So if I'm looking for perfect, it would be 120. But really anywhere between 140, I'm good. And the bottom number we want between 60 and 90. So perfect would be 75. So what's a perfect blood pressure? A perfect blood pressure would be 120 over 75. Now it's tough to get that. So we say between 100 and 140 over between 60 to 90. Now our body works really hard to keep this blood pressure between these numbers. But if there's any blockage or any issues, we get into some problems that can lead to what's called hypertension. If we have high blood pressure, another name for high blood pressure is called hypertension. That means that our heart is pumping harder than what it normally should. It's like if you think about a hose. If you've got a hose and that water, you turn on your water faucet and the water's coming out the way that it should. That's a good, healthy, blood pressure. But if that hose is got gunk in there and it's clogged up, you might have to turn that water on even more powerful than what you normally would to get the same amount of water. Or no matter how hard or how high you turn the water level on or the water power on, you're not going to get the same amount of water that comes out. So that's what happens with our heart. High blood pressure means it's pumping harder to get the blood to it. Why would that happen? That happens because of something called atherosclerosis, where there's some sort of a blockage. We get blockage somewhere in our body. By the way, question number 8 is listed up here. What's that perfect blood pressure for an adult, which I gave you earlier in this lecture. Now this is what that looks like. So you've got a little bit of a clot somewhere in your artery here. Blood isn't able to get through as easily, and what happens as a result of that, your heart has to pump harder to make this happen. This can be caused by a variety of things, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But this is a neat picture that showcases what those blockages do. Now this is even a cooler picture. So I'm really excited about this picture because you guys know whose heart this is, or at least I think you do. One of you should definitely know whose heart this is because it's your mother. That's going to come in just a second. But when we have a blockage in our heart, whoops, I didn't mean to highlight there. You can see this is a before picture. The black stuff here is blood. Now, blood is supposed to be circulating all the way down and around through here, but there's a blockage here, right? There's some fat that's built up here, and it's not allowing the blood to go through. Now, when this person went in, they were feeling, it was a lady, she was feeling very tired, maybe a little bit irritable. She was, no matter how much she slept, she just wasn't able to keep her energy levels up. Fortunately, when she went in, they saw this and they do a quick procedure where they put in what's called a stent. All right, that stent just looks something like this. It's a little mesh piece that they are able to put in, and it opens up. You can see the fat along the sides here. It pushes that fat, you can see all that fat, up against the arterial wall, and then it allows that blood to really pump through nicely. So that's really a cool picture. And what makes it even cooler is that this is Mrs. Dahl's picture. We really appreciate Gina sharing these pictures with us. She went in, they made this quick fix, and obviously she's healthy now and everything is good. So had she not done this, had she just let it go and continued to fester and not went in and got it checked up, what can happen then is your heart can continue to beat so hard, and eventually it can say, hey, I can't do this anymore, and it starts to go into a pattern called fibrillation, which is indicative of a heart attack. So quick story here. Before I give you this story, this is what a normal heart rate would look like on a monitor. And some of you are aware of this. This is not a very good picture, but this is a normal heart rate. Well, one day my dad, he's a barber. He was working in his barber shop, and by the way, that's my dad. His name is Roger. But that's question number 10. Number 10 is, what's my dad's name? His name is Roger. And he started to feel really weak and tired. He started sweating, just kind of in the middle of the day. He didn't have a customer in. And then his hands started to go a little bit numb. His left hand, he started to get some chest pain. Well, it just happened to be, luckily, my mom happened to be talking to him on the phone, and he didn't sound right. So my mom asked him, what's wrong? And he told my mom these things. I just don't feel good. I'm starting to sweat. My chest is really heavy and my fingers are starting to get numb. Well, immediately my mom put down the phone. She got in the car and she raced over to my dad's barbershop. By the time she got to him, he couldn't walk. So she ran out. She got someone to help her put my dad into the car, and they brought him into the hospital. When they brought him to the hospital, instead of having this heart rate, they noticed that he was having this heart rate. It was a bumpy heart rate, but notice that all those little spikes are gone. This is called fibrillation. So what they do is they put these paddles on him that pump electricity through his body. So electricity goes in here and out here. Well, my dad's heart is right in this area. And as it travels through his body, it hits his heart and it tries to shock this rhythm into this rhythm. Now, my dad was lucky because it took a few times for this to take place, but eventually it did. Now, if that would have not happened, many of you are aware of this pattern, that it would be flatline, nothing. This is bad. This is no heart activity, and usually means death is either here or very close. So at least with this pattern, we know there's an opportunity to save him. This pattern, you can still shock, but it's a lot tougher to get back into that fibrillation. So the story goes, he was shocked multiple times. At one point, he was out for 15 straight minutes and got shocked over and over and over again. And fortunately, he was only 45 years old. They got that heart going. They got it healthy. They needed to take him by ambulance to have immediate surgery. Why would he need to have surgery? Well, because even though we got his heart back into this rhythm, his heart would have looked very similar to Gina's heart. There's a blockage here on the actual heart that's not allowing it to do the job that it should be doing. So we need to put in a stent, put the stent in right in here, push that fat apart, and allow the blood to continue to go to his heart. See, the issue is that, let's see if I've got a picture here. Sorry, I'm going to go back. The issue is that the heart is not getting the nutrients that it needs. These little vessels here, these are your coronary vessels. And if these aren't getting the blood that it needs, that means your whole heart is not getting the nutrients and the oxygen that it needs. So your heart is not healthy. And then that poses obviously a big problem. So a few days later, fortunately, my dad got into good spirits. He's feeling good. He took this silly picture. He's got a lot of good battle wounds with the electrical burns there, and he's got IV bruises there, and he was pretty banged up. But we're happy to report, of course, that he's in good health and all is good as of right now. So anyway, I'm gonna close it out here. I know you guys have said my videos get to be a little bit long, so I'm trying to keep this one a little bit more manageable. How do you prevent this from happening? The big thing that you can do to prevent this from happening is a good diet. Making sure that you're, like we talked about with digestion, getting foods that are filled with all kinds of good nutrients. You want to make sure that you manage a good weight. Exercise is very, very, very important. Managing stress and avoiding smoking. And truth be told, smoking was really probably the main thing that hurt my dad. He smoked for many, many years, and that causes major problems with circulation and the heart. So that's why he really ended up in the situation that he did. So this is how we can help to avoid being in the situation where you've got to go in and be shocked a whole bunch of different times. We can avoid this pattern of fibrillation. Fibrillation is bad, and then we use a defibrillator to get it back into a normal pattern. So that being said, this is going to be where I end today. Next week, I'm going to have a video on the blood, and that'll be our final circulatory system idea. But be sure to email me the answers to questions 1 through 10, and that'll be how I give you guys your points on this. I hope I was able to do good. By the way, for those of you that are not hearing this or your video is scattered, I think it's internet issues on your end, because I only hear that from a few of you. So hopefully this was good. My mic was working, my video was working, and I hope you guys enjoyed it. I look forward to hearing back from you guys. All right, we'll see you later.